Live. We are live. I might drop out any second. Who's facilitating? Go.
Is anyone listening?
We didn't agree.
Anyone out there?
Well, welcome to the second Black Ops testing webinar, where none of us quite know who's facilitating. Alan is in a hotel room in Sweden with an iffy internet connection. I've got nursery rhymes going on outside my door. Steve is, by the look of it, still at work. And where are you, Tony?
I am home. My dogs may interrupt in a little while because the weather is sending them a bit doolally, but we'll see how we get on.
Yeah. You may notice that Alan drops in and out from time to time when he loses interest or internet connection, one or the other. And so we'll see how much flanneling we need to do while Alan isn't inbound. Tony, you keep disappearing as well. Is all well there?
Do I? I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay, you've gone very dark from my end. Users will be able to tell us whether they can see Tony or whether they can't. So this week,
how many testers does it take to run a webinar?
Less than 4. 4 is difficult. So Tony, you're facilitating.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so for this second webinar, we decided to have a look at TodoMVC, which is basically a Hello World app which shows different JavaScript frameworks. I don't know, should we actually do a round of introductions? Should we skip that part? I'll kick off. My name's Tony Bruce. I run Tony Bruce Consulting. Most of my work is based in London. Next.
My name's James
Steve Green. Oh, we go.
Tell you what, Steve, go. Steve,
I thought we were going to go to the right. So I'm Steve Green, the Managing Director of Test Partners. We're an independent software testing company in London, specialising in exploratory testing.
James?
I love the idea of going to the right, because I'm furthest right of all of you, and my guess is we've not got all the same layouts on our screens. My name's James Lindsay. No, there we are. My name's James Lindsay. I'm a test strategist. Some of the time, I'm a tester, and I go and I teach people how to test from time to time too. If you want to see what I'm thinking about in a public fashion, follow me on Twitter at WorkroomPlugs. Other than that, I have some nice toys to play with on my website. I think, Alan, you're the last one.
I thought I'd been. I'm Alan, evotester.com. I thought I'd been already because I must have dropped my connection. This is going to be so professional tonight.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Yeah, well, you're going to be sat in your hotel room explaining things to the world while the three of us are going, yeah, Alan's forgotten what he's doing again. He's just hit disconnect. So, yes, highly professional webinar. Welcome. So, Tony.
So, as I said, we were looking at TodoMVC. Who wants to go first and explain what they did? I think maybe Alan, while we've got you, maybe you should go first. Say again, whoever that was.
Should we not introduce what TodoMVC actually does before we say what we did to it?
Yeah, hopefully everyone here has already had a look at it themselves. But essentially, yeah, it's a Hello World app to show JavaScript with, well, that's it basically, show different JavaScript apps.
How about one of us shares their screen while somebody else narrates? Should we try? He said, realizing that I've set myself up, haven't I? I'll get doing. So there we are. There's that turning up. I'll hit share screen and then I'll drag something over. There we are. Screen share. Some of you should shortly be able to see my screen. I have too many of those things up. So start screen share.
No. There we go. Yes.
Can you now see TodoMVC? And if I scroll around, yes, I have too many windows with TodoMVC in them, and that's the other one. So now if I scroll that, you should be able to see me scrolling. So this is TodoMVC. This is running on their website rather than on my local copy. Every instance of a link on here takes you to something that looks pretty much identical. Ta-da, it's a to-do list. And you can see I've been testing in this one by the number of snowmen you can see on screen at this point. So TodoMVC is a to-do list. It lets you put things in Let's get React coming up. React isn't reacting very quickly. If my first to-do list is to say hello, and then my second list is to say goodbye, or something along those lines, I can tick off say hello and it goes away, and then I can just look at my active ones. It's a very simple, straightforward app. The point here is that it's been written using a whole bunch of different frameworks. All of these frameworks which work on JavaScript, that compile to JavaScript, and various other approaches, and so you can look at these different frameworks and decide which one is for you. It's an interesting thing to test. We've had it in the test lab once, and I think we'll have some neat insights into it and how we test. So, can I stop sharing my screen now and put my documents back on?
Yes.
And how do I do that?
No idea.
No, me neither. Let me de-click one of these things. There we are. That should be it. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. There we are. That's me. So somebody else now, please.
Okay, Steve, do you want to go?
Okay. I'll do a screen share of the way I decided to plan and track my test coverage. So I'm going to share this spreadsheet that should come up in a second. Okay, and this is the spreadsheet we use for most of our projects in the lab, if they're small projects. And so in columns 1 to 4, we've got a hierarchical list of all the tests that we're running. So in column 1, they're top-level ideas like keyboard interactions, spelled wrong, permitted characters, string lengths, and so on. Then in column 2, we sort of break those down into sub-tests, and in column 3, we break these down even further into some sub-tests. Then over in the middle, I've got the first column of results. So this is Backbone on Firefox 17, results for each test. And I decided to do a bit of compatibility testing, so I've got separate columns for Backbone in IE 10 in Chrome, and then I looked at Dojo, 3 browsers in Dojo, and then right on the end, 3 browsers with Dijon. But as is normally the case, I didn't do every test with every browser. I sort of hopped around a bit. So I decided to start off with looking at keyboard interactions to see how you can get data into the system. Obviously, typing is one way to do it. Copying and pasting, both with Control-V and mouse right-click. I tried using the Alt key and number pad to put characters in, and finally the Alt-GR key that allows you to do certain extended ASCII characters. And sadly, all of those worked. I couldn't find any way of getting characters in that didn't work, so I didn't even bother looking at the other browsers. I looked at Dojo a little bit. I then started to look at permitted characters all the way through the ASCII set, extended ASCII, right up into Unicode, UTF-8 and 16, and rather boringly all of that worked as well. So I moved on, tried some stuff with string lengths. Can you put a 0-length string? No, you can't. Really long strings up to 1 million characters. Nothing interesting happened apart from the text bleeds off the page, which is not entirely surprising. So I moved on a bit more. Tried putting some HTML and some entities in to see how they were handled, and sadly they were all treated as plain text. Sometimes they get treated as actual HTML entities. That should have been a closing body tag. Can be quite interesting when when that string gets treated as a closing body tag, because it just terminates the page. But in this case, that didn't happen, so I moved on. Looked at all the basic features on there, and they all worked in Backbone. Strangely, in the Dijon implementation, all the filtering options were missing. Don't know if that was a bug or if they just couldn't be bothered, but those that were present all worked. Some people regard keyboard navigation as accessibility. I don't. I think that's a functional issue, and it's pretty poor across the board. You can see from the colour coding, anything in pink failed, and there were failures on everything I looked at. So, for instance, the text boxes didn't receive focus, so you can't edit any task you've already created. And the focus disappeared when some elements, mostly checkboxes, had the focus. So clearly the developers really haven't given any effort to that aspect of accessibility.
Does TodoMVC have any accessibility requirements? Because one of the neat things about this is it does have requirements that it asks each of the applications to follow.
I didn't see anything specifically about that, but if you look in the code, it's actually full of ARIA attributes which suggests that accessibility is important, because few people enough use ARIA. So you'd have thought if they bothered to put it in, then they care about accessibility. They've also done some other things, like they've used label elements properly, and so there are a number of things that suggest they know about accessibility, but there are some aspects of it that they've just totally got wrong, and not just in one browser, but in every browser. Next, I tried a couple of simple sequences of events, which, to my surprise, revealed some compatibility bugs. So the first one, really simple: add a task, mark it as done, and then add another item. What could go wrong with that? Well, actually, in Internet Explorer, I will show you. Actually, it deletes the first task when it shouldn't do. So if I go to screen,
be aware you're no longer sharing your screens. Oh,
yes, I'm trying to share Internet Explorer.
And is this IE10 or IE11?
This is IE10.
10, I think it said in the spreadsheet.
Because their requirements are for always the most up-to-date one.
I suspect IE11 does exactly the same, so I'll get rid of that. So to start off with nothing, I'll put A in there and add it. I will then mark it as done, not deleting it, just marking it as done. I put B in, enter. It's added B and deleted A, which it shouldn't have done. We should have had both A and B.
A round of applause.
Yeah, very neat. Now that's Backbone. That's their reference app.
That is their reference implementation, and it's bugged. So if I go back to the spreadsheet, so that is this highlighted failure. As you can see, the same sequence of events works fine in Firefox and in Chrome. Also works fine in IE10 on Dojo.
So on GitHub, there's a list of issues. Do you know if that one was listed? I must admit, I didn't actually look through the list of issues.
I didn't bother looking, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, a similar thing happens in Dijon in IE10, where it removes the first one and doesn't even add the second one. I then did another simple thing: add a task and then basically edit it and replace it with a space. And again, IE10 had some failures, which I will show you.
Ice cream.
Is that?
Actually, no, he doesn't sell ice cream. He comes around at 1 o'clock at night in winter too.
Oh. IE10 has disappeared from my screen share. Oh, where's it gone? I can't show it. The Google Hangout is broken and it won't share IE10 anymore. Okay, I'll move on to a different bug. But basically, the task is removed as it should be, and the insertion point sits there flashing in the middle of the page in a place that is not editable. And in several instances, the focus gets thrown out of the browser window completely, which again would be an issue if you're using keyboard navigation. I found in general the focus control was poor when you used the keyboard to interact. After performing an event, often the focus would get thrown to the top of the page, or the bottom of the page, or out of the browser window completely. Only a couple more things. I had a look at the little code inspection, see if there was anything interesting in there. And what I noticed was that the Select All checkbox actually has a label element. And just occurs to me, you probably can't see this. Right, I can't share that either. Google's just not recognising any of my windows. Let's see if I can bring even the browser up. Yes, so this little Select All checkbox, well, it's a checkbox in some browsers, it's this icon in Chrome.
Yeah.
It has a label element that's been put there specifically for screen reader users to tell them what it does. Unfortunately, it's been hidden from view in the wrong way. It's been hidden using display none, which hides it from screen readers. It should have been positioned off screen, so it would be readable but not visible. And that's the sort of thing you can only find out through code inspection. So those.
So how should it be made invisible?
It should have been positioned off screen by giving it a large negative left margin, typically 999 pixels, and floating it. If you don't float it, then it takes up height and that moves everything down the page. If you float it, then obviously all the content collapses up. It's miles off to the left, and no one knows it's there apart from screen reader users.
And which screen reader do you use to test this stuff?
I didn't in this particular case.
Right, you just know.
I just know from inspecting the code, I know how it will behave. Typically, I would use JAWS. It depends on what the client wants. We sometimes test with NVDA, sometimes with VoiceOver. I don't recommend any of the things like ChromeVox. It doesn't behave like any real screen reader. Definitely don't recommend FANGS, which gives you a text view. Again, it doesn't give you a real experience at all. So I'd say if you've got £1,000, buy JAWS. If you've got £1,000,
And if
use
you
NVDA because it's free, open source. And that is the stuff that I found.
So can you show us the code that you didn't think was correct or isn't correct?
Oh, if Google will let me do a screen share. Oh no, every time I go to do a screen share, it's removed the last thing that I shared.
So while you work that out, Adrian Rapan had a question about mobile
here we go.
browsers.
I can do it now.
No, that's me. That's quite odd.
You see what I'm like?
That's really.
That was very Inception-like. Don't do that again. It gave me a headache.
Okay. Well, can anybody?
Can you see what I'm like?
Can anybody who's got Firebug working?
I can see it on Alan's.
I've got a Firebug up.
Yeah, so there's
I've
it
already done it.
highlighted on.
If you can right-click on that Select All checkbox.
Okay, I can see my face 4 times now. What's happening?
If my screen is showing, I'm not sure
Yes.
because of the connection.
It is.
Over
It
on
is.
the left-hand bottom pane, I've highlighted the line. And then if you look on the right-hand side...
The label says mark all as complete. And over on the right hand you can see it says display none in the styles panel. And display none...
I've got you. Yeah.
That hides that from everything. Basically removes it from the DOM.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a little tip.
And actually, if you go into that and edit it, turn off display none and add a style. Well, actually, just turn off display none. You'll see the text appear right where the checkbox is.
I've got that going on under not Firebug, but Safari's Inspect. If you need me to screen share that. So yes, the text turns up, and what we're saying is not the text should ever turn up on screen, but by marking it display none, it disappears from screen readers too.
That's right.
You never want to see it on screen. You certainly don't want the height to be used, but you've managed to remove it from screen readers.
Yeah. So
okay.
All they should have done was float it, give it a negative left margin, and it would be available to screen reader use. Otherwise, they just come across this checkbox, and they have no idea what it does.
Right.
Okay. So, quick question, guys. Did anyone check any of this stuff on a mobile browser?
It's not supported in the spec.
I had it up on an iPad from time to time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, James,
I found that I tootled around. If you like, I didn't have it up on the mobile browser very much. I had it up on an iPad browser in the test lab and on various phones in the test lab at Let's Test. And what we found was that the reference application was okay but flaky, but lots of other implementations just weren't good on mobile devices. The specific bugs tended to be layout and formatting. And I think that then impacted usability, if I remember correctly. I haven't got anything I can show you. It would be nice to be able to pick up my mobile device and go, here it is, but not today. While we're here, I'll see if I can log in and do stuff. So I found this an overwhelming application, which is a good thing to put into the test lab, something that is overwhelming. It's not overwhelming because it's complex, it's overwhelming because it's got too many combinations. We've got, what are they saying? There's 25 things that are completely working and another 47 that are not working, that's implementations. And then we've got across different browsers and using different operating systems, functionality is fairly straightforward. Going in to find bugs is... You have to go too wide before you go deep. So I found this a particularly difficult thing to test. So I coped with that, and I think that's a necessary thing to share. There were too many ideas I was having. So I decided to follow some things that looked very different. The first thing I did was to pick up a diff tool and to diff various things that looked the same across different implementations to see if there was something that I could just grok, that I could see. So I diffed index.html and I diffed main.js, and I couldn't understand it. I could understand enough to know what was going on. What I couldn't understand was enough to know what was going wrong. And you know, I've played with it enough to know that the bugs aren't necessarily low-hanging fruit on this one. Possibly on the mobile browser side, but they don't just come out and bite you. So I wanted to look at it in lots of different ways. So comparing using index.html, not so good. I looked at various different bits of how the file structures have been put together. Didn't get anything there, but I did find that things were missing. I think there's main.css is the thing that tells you what it looks like, and you'd imagine, yeah, I'll use main.css everywhere in all the implementations because that makes life easy. It's not there in all of them. Or at least I couldn't find it. Maybe it's not there in exactly the right place. Maybe it's generated. So that made it interesting for me. Then let's see, what did I do? I started to play with my local storage. Now it turns out that playing with local storage is one of the fastest ways to hose any browser that you're working with, as far as I can tell, particularly as soon as you open up any of the in-browser things like Firebug or Safari's Inspect element, because then it shows you that your local storage is this big when actually it's that big, and it doesn't work anymore. I've just done my shoulder. So I I wanted to put in lots of Unicode characters. The Unicode character I chose for fun and seasonal effect, given it's the equinox, was a snowman. So having filled something with a snowman, I got into edit my local storage. I wonder if I can show you that. Let me try. Let me try. So we're gonna go for screen sharing. I'm not running with Chrome. No, I'm running. Yeah, no, Chrome is running the Hangout. My testing is happening in Safari. It takes a while for the thing to give me the sidebar so that I can show you what I'm doing in Safari. And then, there we are, I'll do. So I'll start screen share here. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, it is screen sharing, that's good. So you can see by my snowmen that I've been typing in snowmen. Everybody see the snowmen nicely on screen there? He said trying to highlight them. Yes. Yeah. So it turns out you can type in snowman. I've currently got Safari's inspect stuff open. How would I find that normally? I'd go up to, you can't see it because of course you can't see my menuing because it's sharing just a window. I would pick up from my develop menu, I'd choose web inspector. Anyway, under web inspector I have something called local storage, which I think you can see now. Here is everything we have stored, and over here it says to-dos, backbone, and then a universal and very unlikely to be duplicated indicator that says, okay, this is something that we are storing, and it involves the word title and then some other stuff. We'll look down a bit further. So this one says title, and it's got a snowman, and then order. Let me just zoom in. Is this going to work for you? No, it won't work for you because it's changed my screen utterly. It says title and then snowman and order for. So we've got, this is just one entry. Its title is snowman. It's this entry here. It's going to be the 4th on my list. It's not completed. It's got an ID here that matches there. That's how this information is set up. I have to say that got me looking at where my local storage is, and I found out that one particular website is storing 8 megabytes of their stuff on my machine that it has to download every time I go there and then put into local storage, which takes about 3 minutes, which is not the best way of opening a web page that I've ever come across. Anyway, this works fine.
I'm scared to ask what kind of websites you've been looking at, James.
Nodecopter.
Right.
I will name them and shame them. I've named them and shamed them on Twitter, and then he came back to me and said, no, that is what you should do. Here's what we say on GitHub we do. And you go, yeah, possibly what you say you should do, but it does take a long time. So, you want to do it, you do it. So there we are. I'm going to put hello Black Ops in front of that. I can't even spell black. Hello Black Ops in front of that. The bunch of snowmen I've got there in the title, and that's now in local storage. So if I go up and I reset that, what needs to be done? Please don't mess up now. Oh, now you see, this is the problem. Once you bring up your web inspector, you'll notice this is the length of time it's taking to load the page. The web inspector does rather hose the page loading, and I hope I've not hosed my version of Safari here. There we are. And so, having closed the page inspector, now I can see me typing in hello Black Ops. So much as Steve did. My from the account. I wanted to mess around with it in ways that it wouldn't really ways.
Sorry, James, can you repeat that? You're cutting in and out.
And then to go to
Yeah, I haven't caught any of the last 30 seconds.
Oh dear. Can you still see my screen?
Ah, I can hear you now. And
Screen's back.
Screen's back. I am back.
Yeah.
I think that probably what happened there is I was trying to wrestle Safari. It turns out that if you edit local storage while you have your web inspector up, everything hangs, and it looks like it makes Webinar Jam on Chrome hang at the same time. I typed in hello Black Ops into my local storage, and there it is on screen, so I'm happy. But what I was saying with that was, as he turns off his screen sharing, it didn't. That wasn't very interesting, ultimately. I tried testing things. I tested in lots of different ways. I didn't find very much, so I went off for the weekend and came back on the train this afternoon and then tried my hand at a little bit of scripting. So I have Python and I have Selenium and I have a little tiny weeny script that puts in some entries into this and tells me how long it takes. So who wants to see me execute my little tiny weeny script while I talk you through what it ought to be doing? Say yes, James.
Just before you do that, it almost looked like you had the debugger on a breakpoint in the JavaScript, and that looked like why your browser was hanging.
Maybe. I wouldn't know. I hadn't put a breakpoint in the JavaScript. There may be one left in there.
And
I haven't put one in.
Did you notice the difference in the local storage formats? Because I can see you were using two different sites, or two different implementations, and they both have different local storage implementations.
Yes, they do.
And that was visible in your inspector.
I noticed that. I didn't go any further with it. But yeah. Some of them, yeah.
It just shows that's not really part of the spec. And their automated tests, none of the automated tests that the TodoMVC guys have actually check local storage.
Mm-hmm. It's true. There's a whole bunch of tests that within the reference implementation or on the site. There's something called tests.js, which has a bunch of 27 tests that all the sites should be able to fulfill, and they don't all fulfill it. There's another called issues.js, which has apparently known issues, and I believe it's kind of generated from tests.js. Is there any way I can share a file on this? Possibly. Don't know. Anyway, I can. Let me see what happens. Let me mess up Webinar Jam and paste something big in, and we'll see what happens if I paste this into chat. Just because you got it really. So I've just pasted in there. Yeah, you got lots of tests have turned up in chat there. That's what their test code is after I filter it, so I can actually read it without all the crap in there. And now I've made it so you can't read it either. Yeah, there's nothing in there about validation. There's nothing in there about checking local storage. There's nothing in there about what you can and can't store, about the format of it. There's nothing in there about how well it should store it or how fast it should store it. And that led me to my final bit of testing, which was a little tiny weeny Python script. So I shall show you the Python script I'm currently using, because clearly I can paste lots of text into the chat bar. There we are. That's the script I'm using, which makes no sense because, of course, Python indents by tabs. He says, screen share that. Boom. So what you can hopefully see now is a little Python script that calls up Selenium and forces it to use Chrome driver. It's going to look only at the Backbone framework and the UI framework because that turns out to be interesting. And what it does is currently it puts in 150 things, all of which say some stuff with a little identifier on the end of it. And then it times that and sees what happens. So if I run that, I will just take screen sharing off so that I can screen share back on again before everything changes on my machine, as it surely will when I screen share. Screen share off, please. Screen share, cancel. Yeah, right, good, we're there. So I go over to my terminal and I go execute that script, and hopefully, there we are, something turns up which I will now share with you at speed because you'll want to see it. I've got about 10 seconds to do this. Screen share, that one, start screen share. Now you can see currently that it is putting in numbers up to 150. It's going fairly fast. That's Backbone. And Backbone's gone now. Now we're on to UI, and UI starts off pretty fast. And it puts lots of stuff in. And then as we get up above 50 or so, please do what you did before UI. Do it. Do it. Yeah. So now, can you see that it's slowing down?
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's not going brrr anymore. It's kind of pulsing. My previous one of these ran up to 300. Took a long time to get to 300, that kind of speed. I can tell you that if I look back on my... I'll move my turban. I won't bother changing. The backbone took 18 seconds. UE took 27. So it's slower. The point for me is that UE, its first few that it puts in, it goes in really fast. Up to 50 or so, you're fine. More than 50 or so, you can't. It starts to slow down. The more you put in, the more slow it gets. And that's the difference between UE and backbone.js. And I found that with genuinely 10 minutes before we were all meant to talk at the start of this. So I felt like I'd won. Not obviously won against you guys, but I felt like I won against the demons of I've not found anything interesting at all. So that was interesting.
Just you,
I felt.
Did you get a chance to run it against any of the others?
I ran it against a bunch of different things. I found it against none of the others. I have a little spreadsheet here, which I shall look in. Backbone, AngularJS, Angular Perf. Oddly enough, AngularJS and Angular Perf go at roughly the same speed. Ember.js, Knockout.js. Knockout.js is generally a bit faster than all the others, and UE is generally a bit slower. I would say it is a half to... sorry. It takes 2 to 3 times as long as any of the others when you're putting in 300, but as it gets slower as you put more in, clearly if I go to 400 it's going to take longer still. It's not a linear relationship. So that was the only really interesting thing I found, looking around and testing it for unexpected emergent behaviors and things that looked odd to me. I can share. I have shared my script. I've shared my tiny automation crappy script. So, welcome to that, should you wish. Anybody got any questions, any ideas?
Yeah, were you able to determine the relationship with that UE one between the sort of how long it takes and how many entries there have been to see? Obviously, it's not linear, but is it exponential or?
It feels it gets worse as time goes on. That's as good as I can say. Exponential means something special. It went from being roughly 10 entries a second at the start to being roughly 2 entries a second at the 300th entry. And you could see it was still going fairly speedily at 150. So it has a really big slowdown between 150 and 300. I imagine it would push it on to 400, it gets slower still. So exponential might be too big a word to use, but that's how it looks. It looks like it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
The thing is, James, given that this app is for developers to help them determine which framework is best, that's probably one of the better tests that as a group we've done, right? Because you've demonstrated to the developers that this framework can be faster than this one with this approach to building lists. So that's actually really useful.
It felt like something that I'd want to know. This is to do with selecting between things. It felt like something I'd want to know kind of up front. 2 or 3 dinky little performance metrics would be quite nice to have if you're playing with these things. And given that it's all the same technology in the background, it's all putting stuff into your browser's local storage. It might be different between different browsers and different devices and everything else, but it's all trying to interact with your local storage. That's the same. What's going on with the different implementations? I don't know. I've not gone and had a look at you. As I said, I found this with just a few minutes to go.
What would be interesting, in parallel to chatting, if you could get your browser up and look at the local storage now to see how UE implements local storage, because it might be a DOM issue, it might be the local storage issue, the way it's using it might be a combination of the two, but comparing the use of local storage with the Backbone one, because you see how Backbone does it. Backbone writes in an entry for each and it maintains an index, whereas what UE and the other ones might be doing is just a huge local storage that it's dumping in each time.
Yeah, it might have just the one thing it's putting into. Yeah, don't know. And I can go and have a look at that while we're chatting.
But Tony, you had an interesting thing to point out.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next and try the screen sharing thing since it's working so well for us so far. Right, let's see if this works.
Or you could
Does that come up?
Not yet, but you could tell people what magic it's going to be.
Well, I was just going to share my test report and go through that.
Okay.
And from my view, it looks like I'm sharing it. Is that not
Yes,
coming
you are
up?
now.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see it.
So yeah, basically, I used a Linux machine. As the rest of the guys, I think Alan suggested TodoMVC, and I thought, okay, whatever. And then I had a look at it, and I thought, what am I supposed to do with this? So I basically just, as my mission, I decided to browse and look for anything I thought would be worth testing further. I did not look at the template doc or the app specification. I just picked one at random, and I picked Polymer. I stuck it through Chrome and Firefox, Firefox 26 and Chrome 35. Those are Linux versions. As Steve noticed, there was a few kind of differences in the GUI. So top one is Chrome, bottom one here is Firefox. Essentially the little, whatever they're called, little arrows, and the ticks are missing. Also, there were some differences between how it reacted with the amount of text you put in. I then wanted to see what happens when there's a lack of local storage. So in Firefox, I attacked the advanced settings, which you can get to if you just type in about:config. It'll bring up a list of stuff. I'd be careful with messing about with that stuff because it is your advanced settings. But it looked like by default, I say by default because I've never done anything with it before, it was set to 5 meg for my local storage. So I actually changed that to really small, and it's in kilobytes, so I changed it to 1 kilobyte. Oddly, the app breaks when you've got no local storage. You can't, however, see anything in the GUI, but you have to check the browser traffic, and you can see the error messages, which should be on screen now. Is that readable?
Just about.
Okay, so I saw a code 1014, which I've never seen before, and I searched for it, and I couldn't find anything that I thought was relevant to what I was seeing here. So if anybody knows what code 1014 is, please yell out.
Well, you said browser traffic, but there isn't any browser traffic.
That's a browser code, Tony. That's not HTML.
Yeah, sorry, the browser. Actually, there are a couple of gets. I was looking at the online version, sorry. But there were a couple of gets in the beginning, for me, anyway, which is why I had this up in the first place, and that's why I saw this. But yeah, this is the browser code, sorry. I put it back to 5 meg, and oddly enough, it was all okay. I was going to muck about with it a bit further and just increase the sizes, because I kind of assumed you'd get an error message of some kind at some point. I only did it with one difference, so I just did it with 5K and didn't see anything. So I put that down to check later on. I also noticed some of the differences between what's actually stored in local storage. So for example, in Firefox, if you mark something as completed, and you can actually get, there's a little script you can run to get everything that's stored in local storage. It's not actually marked as completed. I've highlighted it. I thought that would make it easier to read, but probably not thinking about it on the screen share. But that little grey box basically says completed false. However, in Chrome, when you do the same, it's completed true. So I kind of played around with Firefox, and I found that you have to refresh the screen for it to actually change in local storage, whereas in Chrome you don't. I don't know whether that's a bug or what, but I thought it was quite interesting. I found it interesting. I also noticed in Chrome, in the local storage, you actually get the ID numbers and so on that James mentioned. Sorry, Steve, yep.
Yeah, before you move on,
yep.
You're saying it doesn't, what is it, Firefox doesn't store the completed status in local storage, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So what
until you refresh. You have to refresh.
What if you don't refresh? What if you close the browser and open it again? Does it then have a different status to what it had before you closed it?
I must be honest, I don't remember. I didn't write that down.
Which
I have no clue. That's one for me to check after the webinar.
Sounds like it's got this data in memory as well as in local storage, and then not in. Sorry,
what was the last part? You cut out.
It sounds like this data is in memory as well as the local storage, and then not in sync.
Yeah, so I find that
if you close the browser and open it, it'll come back in a different state than before you closed it.
Yeah, actually, it was still set to false. So yeah, but I'll need to double check that. I might be remembering funny, but yeah, I found that interesting. And also, as I mentioned, what James pointed out about the different numbers. So if you can have a look still on the same screenshot, the bottom part is Chrome, and it's got actually the ID number of the backbone for To Do, whereas Firefox local storage did not. I did not check the specs, so I don't know if it should actually have it or not. Either way, I just thought that was interesting.
Spec doesn't say anything about it.
Okay, so that might be up to developer preference, but it seems to me a good idea to have numbers. Anything you can reference would be good, but I guess that's it. So yeah, so some of the things I put down to look up later was code 1014.
If I can jump in.
Yeah.
Might the number be in case you have different instances of Backbone in different browser windows or tabs? Then it knows which one is which. And without an ID, maybe all of those instances share the same local storage.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point to follow up. But yeah, so where was I? So I was thinking about whether or not, like I mentioned, whether or not to play around with local storage size and see if you get an error in the GUI, or whether just to check the code base and see if there's anything in there. I mentioned the not completed, and I mentioned the true not saving. I did come across something about perf testing your local storage. I wasn't sure whether that's actually worth doing with this app or not. I guess it's similar to what James has already done with his script. I've also just added a new part to my template, which I edit as I need, and I've stuck in a bit cheat code bit. So the code in front of you there is actually what you can use to get whatever's stored in local storage. And that's me.
Well, you can also just type local storage into your console and you'll see it.
Well, you could do, but that looks more impressive. Yeah, so any questions apart from the ones I just
I've got a question for all of you that I probably can't answer because I'll fade in and out. But when you looked at the app initially and you saw how it was made and you saw what it was composed of, what errors did you think you were going to see?
Well, I kind of figured there'd be differences between the browsers. I didn't know if you could count that as an error or not. But if you could, it was looking as if it's a Hello World app and it should all be the same, then I would think it would be all the same in any browser. But whether or not you count that as an error or not, I don't know.
From my point of view, it wasn't that I had any idea in the first instance what it would do, because I didn't have a good feeling for how people had been making it. It was clear that the application itself was relatively simple, but looking into the README gave me an idea of what sort of errors I was going to see, because the README says you must use our template, you should ship with unit tests, we will run these set of 27 tests against your system. You must use our CSS. This is the layout of files we want, and this is the layout of files in the directories we want, unless your thing goes beyond. Sorry, unless the framework you're using has requirements or one might call best practices that indicate otherwise. So it had some fairly clear guidelines, not on what they wanted the thing to do, but on how it should be built and what would be shared. And a lot of the low-hanging fruit for me would turn up in the stuff that actually they're sharing. So because this has been implemented so many different times then, I wasn't expecting to see any problems in the shared parts. So I wasn't going to look there. And I had a good look at the tests, which I pasted in that great fat wad of rubbish. And those tests seem, well, you know, Michael Bolton would say checks, and checks they are. They're not anything more sophisticated than does it do the simple thing? Yes, it does the simple thing. There's nothing that goes wider than that. There's nothing that goes deeper than that. So I expected to see problems when I did lots of the same thing. That was my feeling about what I would look for. Lots of the same thing, and I was very keen to do diversity of platform, which I didn't get to because I didn't get it. And it turns out my tiny platform here has run out of batteries, which is what I But that was, yeah, I had a better idea about what problems I'd see after kind of half an hour spent reading the documentations and just fiddling with it, that there weren't going to be low-hanging but fruit on most of them. Second thing, though, is that there is a list of known problems, and in fact, even on the front page, those things in one colour are judged to be okay and reference-ish, and those in another colour are judged to be problematic. And I didn't really want to find anything that had already been found by an automated test. So I wanted to find things that their tests weren't doing. Does that answer your question,
Alan? Kind of. So the answer is individual. So yes, it answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me it was more just starting to go through a few things and then coming up with some ideas. At first I just didn't have a clue.
I mean, I was expecting to see the cross-browser stuff because it's CSS. I was expecting to see a lot of CSS differences, and you see that when you use the Polymer one. I wasn't expecting to see so many differences in the DOM layout. So your first thing you tried to do, James, with your diff, that was really interesting. That never occurred to me, but if that could be automated across, that would be a really good way of assessing potential risk for that, particularly if they're using the same CSS to style it. And because the automated tests are completely function-based, and the locators that they use, they seem to use XPath, which I found interesting, but they seem to be very small locators because you can pass the automated test even if you've got really bad layout, which is good. But their automation is really interesting, so I'm going to look at that in more detail, that use of JavaScript for WebDriver integration. Because there are some automated issues, there are some issues when you try and automate this, particularly when you try and get the hover, because I don't know if you noticed the delete on the to-dos. It's a CSS controlled rendering, so there's no JavaScript. So when you hover over it, it's CSS making it display. And if you're using an automated tool and you're not moving the mouse properly, the mouse can take the hover from something else, and it's quite an interesting problem to solve. So anyone that wants to do automation on it will take a good 10-15 minutes to resolve that issue. And then you've got...
But isn't that one that they've not resolved? Because one of the... No. Yep. If you look at their tests, one of the things they say is we've not got the hover one sorted, not the hover test sorted out yet. There are two tests that they're not doing well. And I think one of them...
So I need to look at... Yeah, it is. So I need to look at their test in a bit more detail to see, because I know they're using WebDriver, I'm just not sure which browser they're kicking up. And if it's a headless browser, it might be why they're getting that issue. But I'll have a look at that in more detail. And the other interesting thing is, when we're doing the testing manually, we're dropping into local storage a lot. But the automated tests that they've got don't hit local storage. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that all the implementations are completely different. So you have to build an abstraction layer on top of the local storage, and then inject an implementation of that for each platform implementation. And the other thing is that WebDriver doesn't, out of the box, give you a way of accessing local storage. So you have to build your own abstraction layer that injects JavaScript in order to get it.
While we're talking about local storage, I'll just tell you that what I've found from looking at UE versus Backbone, which is what we did with that little script. If I go into local storage, I find that Backbone has got an entry in local storage for each item on the to-do list, whereas UE has only one entry in local storage, and that contains all the items in the to-do list, which is what you suspected, Dan.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know how to go into local storage using Selenium. Yeah, I'd have to write some JavaScript somewhere.
I can show you if you want. If my screen share holds up, let's have a look.
I'm going to have to just duck away for just a couple of minutes. I'm hearing somebody saying "Daddy."
So, Alan, have we lost you, or are you still here?
Looks like we've lost him as well.
And James has forgotten to put himself on mute.
Networking difficulties.
I'm just going to be on mute.
So this is an implementation of local storage access with WebDriver, and basically all you're doing is, so this is a wrapper on top of it, but there you can see that all I'm doing is executing JavaScript to get the values out. WebDriver comes with bindings for the mobile browser, but not the main browsers. You're not on mute enough. So I'm experiencing network difficulties.
So just quickly, James, you're not actually on mute. You are now. Do we still have you, Alan?
Yes, just. So I'm done. Network difficulties will cause me to stop.
Okay. So are we going to? Well, I assume we're going to share everything on the Black Ops Testing website again.
Can do.
So if you're happy to share your code on there, that's the place to go have a look at it. Does anybody else have anything to add before we sign off? Are there any questions from the chat group? I don't know. I can't remember what the delay is, but ask them while you're still here, and maybe we'll catch them. James, I can hear you talking. I see you talking. I can't hear you though.
We'll stick around on the chat group for a little bit longer because there is a delay between this and the chat group to answer any questions you've got. I'll be in and out of the room for kind of obvious reasons. Say hello to the testers. Hello, testers. Bye-bye.
So, okay, so is there anything that we would try going forward? I'm kind of interested in the performance testing of local storage and the apps that interact with it. I need to read a little bit more up on it. Was there anything else that you guys would want to look at further?
Nothing new. I think doing more of what I've done would reveal more bugs on different browsers, but I was pretty much coming to the end of what I could do with my skill set.
That's not true, mate.
I didn't look at the local storage at all. Didn't have time for that, so probably play around with that. Although you guys have done a lot of that already. So no, well, actually thinking about it, there was quite a lot of stuff I didn't look into. Some of the more obscure implementations. So. I can't say there was anything specific I'd do it in the case of actually poking around to see what's there before perhaps focusing in more closely on something.
So did anybody try it from the point of view of actually adding a new framework in there, just to see what it would do?
No.
You mean creating a new implementation of TodoMVC?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
No! No!
I will definitely bring up some bugs. Come on.
Yeah. I think, well, what I'd like to do is, if I was going to do more of this, is clearly this is something that would respond only efficiently to a big chunk of automation in some areas. I mean, I'm sure there's a good set of manual things to go do, but I would want to automate something. I'd want to automate something that could happen all across all implementations and would hopefully tell us something new about those implementations. So rather than add a framework, I'd like to add a test. I'd like to add a couple of tests that are automated suite, and then those would run whenever. I think that would be an interesting thing to do. Adding a framework, well, firstly, I don't have a framework in mind to add, and secondly, I'm not that interested in the frameworks. But yeah, that would, for me, there's some places that one could usefully add automated testing that would tell interesting stories, I hope, about how these things are actually working. So for instance, with UE, although it's clearly storing something different, that might have been the coder's decision to store in local storage in that way, or that might have been what UE gives you. I just don't know. I can't look into that. But at least this would tell me to go and look. Alan's mastered the art of sitting very still again, hasn't he? So we've got a question from...
He's gotten very good at that.
Yeah. We've got a question from Solomon Crikey. AGBO, I can't read it and talk at the same time. So he says, why is it important to test local storage? It's important to test local storage because this application doesn't store anything on a server. It doesn't use anything other than local storage to store the information that it has. Steve, when we talked about this a few days ago, you tried Fiddler out. How did you find Fiddler worked for you?
It gives you nothing except when the page loads. You, as Tony said, there's a couple of gets, and the page comes back. After that, there is no HTTP traffic for anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that answers your question, Solomon. It's because that's where the interesting stuff is. Local storage is where it's putting stuff, so that's why it's interesting to get into that. And it feels unusual to find an application that does, if you like, local stuff first and doesn't go off to the net to store anything. So that was a neat thing to look into. I can't say I've ever tested an application that uses local storage to anything like this extent at all. Possibly thinking about it. Any more questions? I know Dan and Neil are going no, nothing. So, any more insights from the four of us? Well, three of us, three of you, because I've got no more insights.
I don't really.
So, Alan, would there be anything that you'd think about looking at further?
So, on my
based on what we've just gone through in the session.
So, not necessarily based on the session, but I do have a to-do in my notes here to look at their automated tests in more detail. One, because I think the JavaScript approach they're using is really interesting. The other is to try and expand it because they don't check for local storage. They do have some issues. I'm not sure what browser they're using, and they're using XPath instead of CSS, which seems really odd to me given the JavaScript nature of their app and their approach to testing. So I think they could speed up their tests if they went for CSS and make them more reliable.
There are two bugs in their database, or two issues in their database. I think it's something funny like 244 and 255 that describe why they're doing the tests in the way that they're doing them. And I can share those with you if you like. I'm just looking for them and I can't find them. But yeah, so there are two issues out there that say this is what we need from this, and this is why we need it. And because it's a very long conversation on both of those, you can get an idea perhaps of the reasons why some decisions were taken, because they definitely didn't start off with a JavaScript-based approach. They started with something coffee-related.
Okay. I've been on CoffeeScript. So. It's still interesting. It's an interesting approach, and it's good to see an app that was completely JavaScript-based being tested through JavaScript, even though it's using a browser-based tool. So there's a lot of interesting things to look at. I will learn stuff by doing that, so that's good.
Yeah. I will find that. Well, I'll find that thing for you, then share it with you. How are we sharing stuff this time?
We may as well stick it straight on the Black Ops site.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so the two bugs are unit testing bug 254 and end-to-end testing bug 255. And those have got a long description about why different approaches were taken for those two. And there are earlier bugs. And Mocha is the framework that they were going to use for testing that is coffee-related.
Right.
That's M-O-C-H-A, not M-O-C-K-E-R. And I'll remind all of us that there hasn't been enough mocking in this session. We've not taken the piss enough.
To be fair, we've all experienced broadband.
Sure, you can take the piss out of me.
Haven't been able to get a word in edgeways.
No,
I'm going to have to watch this back. I've missed most of this. So.
Okay.
All right.
So there's no more questions coming through. No, please continue. Sorry.
It's been a long one. Been on for an hour.
Righty-ho. Neil has handily shared those two bug numbers, so we can guess that actually the delay isn't that great. So thank you very much, Neil. Yeah, we're slightly more than an hour since we started, so I think we're going to wave goodbye to you guys and call a halt to this. Yeah, Alan, have you got control in the hotel room?
I do. So I will say bye-bye, everyone, and count everyone wave. I will shut up, and then you can all wave too. You have to say something so your face pops up while you wave. Bye-bye.
Evening all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.